So, it's December 2013. It's been an eventful couple of years.
That it has.
And, I thought it would be a good idea if we sat down and just sort of chatted about what's occurred in the last year or so. And there's been a sea change in immigration. And whether, Jason Kenney, the most activist Minister of Citizenship and Immigration, is now no longer nominally the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration.
Who is that? Who is the Minister of Immigration now? I don't even know. Who is it?
Chris Alexander.
Oh, okay.
It's Chris Alexander.
All right. I wasn't sure.
No, but I think it's still Jason Kenney because...
Yeah, he still seems to be talking about it. Yeah. Wasn't he? He's still going to many events and...
he's still the Minister of Multiculturalism. And so that allows him access to many of the same groups.
One might wonder if he's thinking of being Prime Minister one day the way he acts.
I don't think there's no doubt about that.
Yeah, recently I had a very interesting conversation with a prominent lawyer out in Vancouver. There were new provisions, as you know, there are new provisions in IRPA about cessating or taking away people's permanent residence status and the refugee protection as protected people in Canada if they reavail themselves. As we know they've actually not done this to anyone. And the intent, and you might remember, the intent of it was just to take away the status for individuals who were, right after their refugee claim, maybe went straight back or were obvious fraudsters. The example I just heard, what he advised me, apparently they now have dedicated funding to different offices across the country to commence these cessates and see how far they can go. And so the example I heard was of a woman from Mexico 14 years ago who got her refugee status, is a permanent resident, applied for citizenship in 2010 with a teenage child who returned to her country a number of years ago and just shortly, and now they're seeking to cessate her refugee and take away her permanent residence status. There'll be no H&C, no PRA, no appeal.
Yeah, and so I think what I find sort of not quite amusing, because this is kind of mean-spirited, is that you win your refugee claim and you think you're clear. You've got permanent resident status based on that protected person status. And then, you're in this country for 10 years, a decade and a half you're in this country. And all of a sudden, the long arm of Canada's immigration is going to reach back and it's going to strip you of your status in Canada. It doesn't matter how many years you've been in this country. It doesn't matter how much taxes you've paid in this country. It doesn't matter that you have kids in this country. It doesn't matter that you have a house in this country. It doesn't matter that your ties are all to this country. But because you visited the country against that you've made a refugee claim, they're entitled to bring this action.
It reminds me, I saw a show where this little child is playing in the grass, on the grass and on the beach, and everything seems safe and fine, and the world is good, and a zombie comes out of the ground and gets her when you least expect it. But my point being
your point is the zombie is Jason Kenney
and immigration.
Yeah.
It's been a very interesting year.
Yeah.
And I think we've seen the most mean-spirited intent that I've ever seen in immigration since with the changes in the legislation.
Well, there's no more benefit of the doubt.
Nope.
Right? So, and the other thing is that we know for a fact so much of this is driven by budgets. We know that this is a make-work project, right? There's no possible reason to cessate individuals that have been in this country for 10 years. Right? This is really, you're cutting your nose to spite your face. You're removing tax-paying, contributing Canadians.
It's despicable and it's shameful. And I think if the vast majority of people actually knew...
It's a little bit inside baseball, so I don't think the average Canadian... There's not going to be any news stories about this because...
They're going to be too busy talking about their most wanted list.
Yeah.
And
What I find funny is the marriage fraud. Remember marriage fraud? Jason Kenney went up and down, turning red, that vein popping in his forehead, saying, hey, we're going to take action against marriage fraud. All these guys that have committed marriage fraud and Canadian sponsors, and we're going to make sure that we deport these scofflaws. And what do we got? No real dedicated fundings there. And you've got maximum of 5-7 officers in charge of these files all across Canada. So this is another example of we're going to play to the gallery. we're going to make a lot of noise, we're going to hit the news, and then of course we're not going to actually do anything effective against it.
Yeah, no, it's ironic. They always go for the weakest individuals.
The low-hanging fruit.
Low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And typically speaking, that's been what we've seen for the last year and a half, or whenever a lot of these changes have been implemented. But that being said, I have faith that we're still hanging in there for our clients. People are still getting status. People are still...
But it's tough. I mean, every day you've got to check the news for what else could go wrong. So, for example, you get sponsored to Canada. You can't sponsor yourself, a spouse, for 5 years after your own landing. No exceptions. So let's say you get sponsored to Canada, and let's say your spouse dies, and you go back to India or China or wherever else, and you get remarried, and you want to sponsor your new spouse to Canada. You can't do it for 5 years. That, again, this government doesn't like discretion. They don't like giving discretion to officers. I mean, of course, use some discretion. Sometimes you should waive that requirement, right? Like, what if the sponsoring spouse was abusive? What if the sponsoring spouse is dead?
What I find funny about this, when I go to immigration and do my detention reviews or whatever, I have all these pictures. You ever see the pictures they have up on the wall when you go to immigration and the check-in counter?
Yeah.
Come to Canada for $5. $5, and here's a ticket to come to Canada and get your little parcel of land. And that's how easy it was and how welcoming it was. And if you worked hard and came here and you had a ticket, you could make a future for yourself. It was like that until not very long ago. All of a sudden, Canada's become Liechtenstein, where we have this Tea Party government. Don't kid yourselves. That's exactly what they are. These are Tea Party Republicans in Canada who run this country, who want to create this homogenous, English-only society of white doctors or whatever it is they want. But it's not the society that this country's built on. It's not what the immigrant population has been, and it's not how this country has grown. And I think it's shameful what they're doing.
Well, there's been a number of exclusionary policies, and when you commented about those posters in room 170 of Harry Hayes, remember 1910, 1912, we had 400,000 people come from Europe. And, in that same year, Komagata Maru, 330 brown guys showed up, and there was street protests. And they used the force of exclusionary laws based on where a person's from to exclude those 300 guys from Canada, but allow the 400,000 from Europe into Canada. And so you see the same exclusionary policies now.
Yeah.
For example, the safe countries, the so-called safe countries, or the designated countries of origin, and you do a lot of refugee cases. So a Roma from Hungary, comes to Canada, no appeal for a negative refugee decision, no health care, no work permit for 6 months, but a Roma from Romania can come to Canada, he gets health care coverage, he gets a work permit, he gets an appeal to the RAD. I mean, that is a pretty arbitrary distinction, and it's based only on the country of origin. And I think that that's exclusionary.
Absolutely.
One good development, this Christmas season, this holiday season, is that Ontario's decided to step in and cover the gap for refugee healthcare.
Kudos to Ontario for that. Kudos to
Ontario,
good on that.
Saskatchewan, yeah, absolutely. Quebec, for example. That was really a moral failure by our federal government, that we're going to deny healthcare coverage to individuals that might very well become permanent residents and citizens of Canada. What a welcome to this country. Before your claim is even decided, whether you have a good refugee claim or a bad refugee claim, we're just going to deny you and your children healthcare coverage.
It was really a black eye for the country. It was a sad day, in my opinion. Canada, contrary to what anyone may think, and I stand by this, we wear blue hats and I'm not trying to diss other countries that do some heavy lifting and do some of the hard jobs in this world, but we're a humanitarian country first and foremost. We should never deviate from those principles. We're a multicultural country, all races, education levels, languages.
We're inclusive and not exclusive. Yeah. And so ultimately, but again, what I find troublesome is that, let's say you have a refugee claim, you make a refugee claim in Canada, you're going to have a hearing within a couple of months, right? Now, if you're found not to be a refugee, you've got limited recourses, and so you'll be removed from Canada. So and if you get accepted, of course, you become a permanent resident in due course. So what's the harm in providing healthcare coverage for those 3 or 4 months? It's just, a mean-spirited and narrow-minded sort of vision. And you know what it is? I'll tell you one thing. This is not about saving dollars and cents. Absolutely not. This is a signal by Jason Kenney to everyone in the world saying, hey, look, you want to make a refugee claim in Canada? Think twice.
Absolutely.
It's an economic disincentive.
He's trying to create a chilling effect on... And I've stood by this, and I stand by this principle. It's a principle of criminal defense work. I'd rather let 9 fraudulent refugee claims get accepted than send one person back to die.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think we should... And you have principles like this. What happens is the good ones get thrown out, and they don't come. And then, is it really worth it? Is it really worth it? Is it really... That someone who... in many cases are just, even if they're not the most legitimate of claims, many people are just desperate. They want a better life for themselves. They want a better life for their children.
But this is politics. He's playing to the gallery, and he's playing to a particular constituency that he has.
Not to mention, we're now exiling and deporting/exiling individuals who have 6-month jail sentences.
I think and I hate the title of this legislation, Deporting Foreign Criminals Faster Act. That's got to be the worst legislative title of all time.
Yes, I think it's right up there.
So when we parse it out, deporting foreign criminals. So when we say foreign criminals, do Canadians know that we're talking about permanent residents that might be in Canada for 20, 30, 40
Or
years?
they were here when they were 1 year old.
Yeah.
Maybe people who've been here since they're 6 months old, 1 day old.
Yeah.
They could be deported when they're 50 years old, and they have grandkids, and they have... And it's perfectly within the purview of the legislation. It's absurd.
So the legislation allows you to be deported irrespective of...
your humanitarian and personal circumstances.
Not even that. Irrespective of the nature of the crime. It could be a white-collar crime, or it could be a violent crime, it could be fraud or an economic crime, or it could be a crime based on an addiction, or it could be something that's violent.
And we all understand there's certain crimes that are reprehensible, that rape, what have you.
And warrant deportation.
But I think at the same time, let's not all be so on our too Pollyanna and live in our glass houses. How many of us haven't made mistakes? How many of us haven't made bad judgment calls or made mistakes in our lives? And we're really going to be so judgmental on people. We're going to ruin their lives because they made one mistake.
The reality is we're going to see deportations based on early guilty pleas, for something as minor as conviction for fraud for passing a bad check.
Or a second drunk impaired driving charge. Who knows? It could be the most innocuous of offenses. I mistakenly had a gun, or there's certain fire. Pot. I grew pot. I'm 19 years old, 20 years old. I watered pot plants when I was 19 years old.
Yeah.
I am now could be deported for that, even though I just made a mistake as a kid.
Again, this is another example of the Conservatives taking discretion out of the hands of decision makers. They've done that for judges, and we see judges in Ontario rebelling against the imposition of these fines that the Conservative government has done.
Because they know better. They're
a trained specialist in adjudication. So yeah, you're going to see discretion. And before, the IAD had discretion. If you were convicted and sentenced to 2 years less a day, the IAD could balance all of these factors. Now, it doesn't matter, right? You've got a thumb on the scale, the Conservatives' thumb on the scale, which is, hey, you get sentenced to 6 months or more. And by the way, conditional in the community doesn't matter. Jail or conditional sentence, you're out.
Unless, and there are parts of me that I'm not the most, I'm very liberal in many ways, but I'm conservative in some ways as well. But socially speaking, this isn't who we are. And I think if the vast majority of Canadians really understood, it got past the rhetoric, got past the sound bites and really understood the agenda of this government, what they were doing to people's families and what they're doing to people's lives, what they're doing to people who aren't bad people. People who are good people, they would be horrified.
And let's
they would be horrified.
The myth of efficient management, let's put that aside. You have put the citizenship applications of 350,000 people on hold, and what has that resulted in? 19 cases of immigration or citizenship fraud. I mean, talk about a hammer to kill a mosquito. And so we have all these people who have lived in Canada, who's played by the rules, and all they want is Canadian citizenship for that passport and so that they can vote. Those guys are being denied citizenship based on, an inexplicable decision and a complete waste of resources, much like the cessation that we talked about.
Yes.
So,
another year coming to an end, 2013.
Another year is done. More changes are in the offing, undoubtedly. That's how immigration is going to be.
We'll see a lot of see how some of this legislation really plays out next year. It's going to be a very interesting year to come, but I know one thing, it's they'll never break my back, and
we're looking forward to the continued fight against for our clients and on behalf of our clients.
Absolutely, 100%. Be a good year.